Good evening and welcome to another hour of Watching Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd. We're so glad you could join us as we help you grow things right. It's really hard to believe that we only have a few weeks left in the season, so give us a call, 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 1-800-676-5446. If you want to send us a picture or two with your question, send those as emails to byf@unl.edu. Tell us as much as you can about what you need to know, including where you live. Those emailed questions we answer on future shows, so don't lose patience with us, please. We'd also like to invite you to follow us on our social media outlets. Check out Backyard Farmer on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Pinterest during the week. And as always, we like to get our shows started with some samples. So Jim, you have a box of beauty.
Yeah, I think so too. I have some moths here. They're called hummingbird moths or sphinx moths, and they're very common right now in late summer. And roughly at sunset, they start flying around the different plants like phloxes and 4-o'clocks and taking a little sample with their long tongues, and they're so fast. Zoom, zoom, you know, like you can hardly see them in one place, and they hover, but they don't make any noise. That's one distinction. They're nocturnal, they're in the evening, they're not like day-flying hummingbirds, which make a noise when they fly. But anyway, here's just representative ones that are in late summer here. So this one here, mainly the big poplar sphinx, is a real large one. It's often in July. I wanted to point out, you can see that I have some host plants that are listed too, and I'm not going to go so much into those. We have our famous tobacco and tomato hornworm set over on this side, and you notice that pupa with a real long trumpet-like beak or whatever. You know, their tongues are so long that the pupa has to have that extra, length of the pupil extension just to accommodate the tongue being so long. And a lot of people find these in the soil, and they're thinking, like, what is it? Has this big long tongue coming out or something like that. So those can be fairly large. And then we get down here to the family of Pandorus and Akamon sphinx, very pretty. There's 2 or 3 generations per season, and they both compete and feed on grape and grape-related plants. All right, and by the way, the hornworms are really interesting too. Probably one of the most common ones that you'll see right now would be the white line sphinx. It's a little bit smaller, and it makes a little gray blur as it flies. And so they basically feed on a lot of different kinds of weeds as hornworms, so they got the advantage. And then we have the snowberry, let's see below in middle there, snowberry clearwing sphinx out during the daytime. And there's a reason why it resembles a bumblebee, so it can camouflage itself, because it's a tasty morsel, I'm sure, otherwise, for some kind of a predator or bird. So it forages on flowers, and we have on the left-hand side, we have that blind-eyed sphinx. And it feeds on a number of different plants. So get used to them, study them up a little bit. They're really neat to see in the evening hours, foraging on those flowers just as you're about ready to turn in and go to bed.
Thank you, Jim. And you said tasty morsel, but unlike Lauren eating the slime mold, you did not take a bite.
Oh, no, we wouldn't taste one of those. you got a ball of fur if you tried to eat one of those.
Right. Speaking of fur, Dennis.
Ball of fur.
That's a big one.
Yeah, so I have some examples of some of what we call our daytime garden robbers, because our ground squirrels are actually diurnal. Most of our rodents and mammals in the state are nocturnal and do all their stealing and stuff during the night. But these two guys are true ground squirrels, which means they hibernate and they're diurnal. This is our biggest ground squirrel, the woodchuck. And this is one of our smaller, more common ground squirrels, the 13-line ground squirrels. Right now, vegetables and fruits are doing well in the gardens, and if it's being robbed or eaten during the day or early morning, these are the culprits. The two ground squirrels. Both of them, the best way to get them out is to cage or live trap them, then haze them and move them 100 foot away. And again, we have the 13-line ground squirrel, the small one, and our large woodchuck.
Do you have any daylight natural enemies, predators?
Yes, these guys are hawks go after these, as well as bull snakes love these. And that's why when these are in a cemetery, I usually always go there and look for bull snakes, because cemeteries that have ground squirrels, it's like a bed and breakfast for bull snakes. You have a stone where they can heat up underneath with the old, before when they had wooden pine boxes. Those are now hibernaculums, and you get breakfast. So these guys, their biggest predators are usually coyotes and things like that.
All right, thank you, Dennis. All right, Kyle, Roddy tomatoes.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, Amy was on here and talking about bacterial spot on peppers, and we actually have some bacterial spot on tomatoes. And so this time it has moved to the fruit. There are a few different bacterial diseases that tomatoes can get. Bacterial canker, bacterial spot, and bacterial speck are all found in Nebraska. And the way that you can kind of tell them apart, or at least tell that this is bacterial spot, is if you look at these lesions, and hopefully you can zoom in close enough, but they are slightly raised. They have kind of a white center. And if you rub your finger over them, they feel rough and just kind of scabby. And that's a good sign that you are dealing with bacterial spot of tomatoes. This pathogen, kind of hard to control, unfortunately. It is spread by seed most commonly, and so typically you'll be planting your tomatoes, they'll be looking fine, and then once we start getting into those hotter days, you'll see a few spots on the leaves, and eventually some spots on the fruit as well. As far as what to do about them, this time of year, not a whole lot. You can try to remove the infected fruit as soon as possible, or any infected leaves that you have. But the big thing is next year, try to rotate your crops. And so don't come in and put tomatoes or even peppers in the same spot. This pathogen can move between peppers and tomatoes. And so if I would rotate to peppers next year, chances are it's be seeing these exact same spots on them.
All right, and can you eat the tomatoes anyway?
It's not necessarily recommended. The bacterial spot in itself won't cause any damage to humans. However, they do form some wounds that some other human pathogens can get into. So if you're at all immunocompromised, I would not recommend it.
All right, Jeff, so some beauty in a vase.
Yes, and if you're immunocompromised, you don't have to worry about these. So that's the upside with that. So we have a couple things. So Kim suggested I bring in some plants that are flowering right now and that she's had some questions about and people have wondered about. So this tall pink lily here that we're looking at is known by a variety of names. The nice names are things like surprise lily and resurrection lily. And this is a plant that we'll see the foliage emerge in May, late April, early May, and you'll see the foliage dies away. And then about this time of year, and Kim was saying that it's a little earlier this year, right? Like a week earlier or so. Mm-hmm. So about this time of year, we then see the flowers, and it's really, in the Lincoln area anyway, it's been pretty dramatic, much more noticeable than normal. So, and this is a plant that if you have a lot of them this year and you'd like to kind of spread them around the yard, after this has died down, so maybe in September, late September, you can lift the bulbs and I would use like a potato fork, something like that. And then you can divide them, separate them, and replant them at about 5 to 6 inches deep. So you can move them. They don't, it's unlikely that you're going to get much in the way of seed or seedlings out of these. Then the other one actually is just growing on the east side of the building here, and that's smoke tree, purple smoke tree. And again, this is one that sometimes I'll get some phone calls asking just what that is, because it is a little unusual, although it does pretty well around here. This is another one that I'd not want in the heat of the day. There's the American smoke tree that has a larger whitish, creamish flower and larger leaves. But the purple smoke tree, it's a Chinese import, and it does well in eastern Nebraska anyway.
It does, kind of shrubby form.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people refer to the smoke, if they don't like it, as dust bunnies.
Dust bunnies. Okay.
I like the smoke. All right, Jim, you get the first picture question. This comes to us from Norfolk, and we did have this question earlier in the season, but apparently this is either infestation number two
Number two,
or
yeah.
something. What is this,
Right.
and what does he do about
This
it?
is caused by rose sawfly, and then we actually have another critter called a rose slug, which is also a sawfly. So you have to think about somewhere about in May the first generation starts. So early May, if you want to try to lick it and try to remove the problem through the rest of the season, you got to get that first generation. And so be checking the undersides of the leaves for pale greenish kinds or almost clear colored sawfly larvae. And then they'd be very easy to control with an insecticidal soap or carbaryl. During blossoming or anything like that, I wouldn't recommend the carbaryl. But once you do that, then you cut the numbers down drastically. When that second generation hits, if there's survivors or whatever, do the same thing. And hopefully you'll get the numbers down by the end of the season. But we've had this, I think, probably for the last 10, 12 years. It seems like year after year we've had issues with these. But keep at it. The rose bushes themselves are pretty strong and hardy.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, Dennis, this is a Roca viewer who lives on an acreage, has honeydew, and has gotten some great fruit, but apparently somebody else is after that fruit too. She does have a 3-wire electric fence to keep the raccoons out. That works. But she says rabbits and squirrels have breached that fence.
Right. By the size of the teeth, and the way the bites are surfaced, it's going to be either rabbit or it could be the woodchuck, which do it that way. A squirrel would take a bite and go deep and get the seeds out. Not that they wouldn't cause. So I was looking at these teeth impressions. I would say rabbit is the prime, with the secondary being a woodchuck.
Okay, and she has to exclude, right?
Exclude, and those a fence that goes 2 foot up, 1-inch holes would exclude them. That won't stop the raccoons. Electric stops the raccoons, but 2 foot up, 4 inches in the ground would take care of the rabbits.
All right.
And the woodchucks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Dennis. All right, Kyle, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 on shroomies.
Ooh, perfect.
The first two are actually the same, but from two different viewers. And this is Omaha, far north neighborhood called Raven Oaks. And the other one is also on the forest floor. What are these?
Well, those are some sort of earth star fungus or earth star mushroom. Not able to really tell the exact type of earth stars, but that shape is very typical of a lot of our earth stars, where it's as they open up and kind of mature throughout the season, those fingers or kind of petals will open and kind of show the nice center inside. Don't eat earth stars.
They're really beautiful.
They are beautiful.
Looks like
and
the best a fungus can do in trying to become a flower.
yes, that's it's trying.
And then just a couple more from the same viewers up north, and they
Okay.
want to know what these are. So this one, she said, looks like coral on the forest floor.
Well, and I would say that looks like dead man's fingers, kind of. So that's just going to be one of our.
I love the names they give.
Oh, yes.
Great.
I know.
I like that.
No, we pathologists aren't terribly unique at finding names, so it's just what does it look like? And something coming up like fingers out of the ground, we'll call it dead man's fingers.
You guys are trying to scare each other at night,
Yes,
aren't you?
exactly.
And then I think we have one more from that same viewer. She really had a lovely trip around.
Man, what a great foraging trip. This is some sort of polypore. I would guess it's a pheasant's back polypore. And this one,
See it.
if it is, again, not very unique in our names, but yeah. So these, if this is indeed the pheasant's back polypore, this one is edible, especially if you find it early in the spring. This time of year, they tend to get pretty leathery. You're not really going to want to cut them, or not going to be too easy to cut open. But just a reminder, anytime you are foraging for mushrooms, unless you know 100% what they are, don't eat them.
Thanks,
Just
Kyle.
please don't.
Message from Dad.
And from us. All right, Jeff, you have some pruning questions.
Okay.
The first is a 40-year-old plus linden. He knows he should have taken those two big ones off early.
Sure.
He's wondering what we would tell him to do now.
Well, what I would say now is unless the tree is damaging something, a structure or something like that, or providing if there was something going on with the branch that you were concerned it was going to fall on its own. I don't know if I would take those branches off. I mean, you'd end up doing a lot of damage to the tree. If for some reason you feel like the branch is going to be heading towards the house or doing something, this isn't the time of year we would do this. We'd wait till before bud break, so sometime in March or April, to do some of that pruning. But it's a healthy tree, and I guess I'd hate to, turn it around and make it into something less. So.
All right, and your second one is actually a magnolia that they think is 50 years old. Terrible structure. They are in Lincoln. She's wondering if they should do something to take the weight off this particular tree or just let it be. And there's the connection at the base.
Yeah, and I looked at that picture closely, and it doesn't, to me, it doesn't look like it's a threat. Again, I don't see there being any particular targets there, and it's not so big that it would cause some of those issues. If you wanted to, again, early in the spring, maybe do some pruning to lighten that a little bit, you could do that. But I think unless that gap is opening dramatically, I don't know if I would do anything. I think for a 50-year-old magnolia, it looks great, personally. So
That was kind of my thought, too.
Yeah.
Don't mess with it.
right.
All right. Well, just a few years ago, we were answering more questions about landscape design than about vegetables and fruits. Gardening trends have changed. People are now more interested in growing their own food. So for our first feature tonight, we're going to look at interesting, delicious things you can grow around your own home. We've talked a lot over the years about specific trees and shrubs and plants you can eat in your landscape, but not really about how to create an entirely edible landscape. So instead of focusing on the individual peach, even though it does look luscious enough to eat, we're going to talk first about the smaller trees. You can substitute apple for crabapple. You can use peaches as long as you realize that these are not long-term plants in the landscape necessarily. The same thing is true of cherries. We have a couple of cherries that are absolutely beautiful. With all these plants, what you really need to start with is what is the fruit you want? How are you going to actually manage that? How do you expect to have that contribute to your landscape overall? And then, of course, is your site suitable for that particular location? Including the brambles in your edible landscape is both challenging and really satisfying. The red raspberries, this happens to be heritage, are going to run, as are the blackberries and most of the brambles. And of course, they have thorns. So knowing the right situation to put them in, knowing how to manage them so they are either kind of a little bramble forest, if you will, or training them properly is going to both contribute to the aesthetics of that landscape as well as provide a greater, higher quality fruit for you for the long run in that edible landscape. We're really focusing on trees and shrubs and perennials that are a part of the edible landscape, but there are many herbs that can also contribute that way. We think always about plants like basil, which of course are tender and annual and beautiful, but you could add borage or thyme or salvia or the sages to your landscape. Those become permanent additions, especially if they're in a hot, sunny, very well-drained area where perhaps some of the other plants that you would like to grow as edibles really won't do quite as well. We've talked about small trees and brambles and herbs. We haven't talked about what we call understory trees, and these are the ones that want to be under the canopy of the big guys. Persimmon and pawpaw come to mind, and notice the fruits on this beautiful persimmon. Of course, not ready yet. This is another one of those trees that contributes to the landscape in a big way, including either the fruits or the suckers that form a colony. And the same is true of pawpaw. They like this shaded condition. Then we go to the larger trees. We could consider hickory, pecan, because we do have some really beautiful northern pecans, walnut as trees that contribute to the landscape and provide that shade, as opposed to some of the trees like maples that are overplanted in many situations and don't really provide things for human beings to eat. And then of course we have those shrubs. We haven't even touched on the shrubs. Elderberries, beloved by the birds and the people, one or two of the viburnums, shrub roses that provide wonderful amounts of vitamin C in those hips, the currants, many, many other plants that can contribute as woody plant material to a truly edible landscape. There's really an amazing number of nuts, berries, fruits you can grow around your own home. Just growing your own food doesn't have to be restricted only to the vegetable garden. We're going to be actually doing a course on edible landscapes. We're going to start that in the spring, so that'll be fun. All right, pictures for you, Jim. This is 2 little worms.
Okay.
The first is 6 varieties of hops, and only one of them had these small black worms with a pair of green stripes.
Okay, that's
What
a
is it?
yellow-striped armyworm. That's the early life stage of the larva. It's very strongly black with those bright yellowish or yellow-green stripes on it. And it
Okay.
gets larger beyond that point. But probably the reason why it's there is because the moth deposited its eggs there.
Okay.
And the larvae didn't move beyond much that point area. And they feed on a number of different plants, so hops is obviously one of them.
Okay, all right, and your second one is really pretty creepy.
Yeah, isn't that pretty? It's like an upside-down flower.
She thought it was a tomato hornworm, and then she thought it was covered with aphids, but she doesn't.
We call that dead man's fingers.
Clever.
Actually, that is a parasitized tobacco or tomato hornworm. It's mature, and when it reaches maturity, it has all these little parasitoid wasp larvae inside of it. Time to leave now. And so, they puncture the skin and they come out of the body and then immediately spin a cocoon. So they've eaten up or consumed all of the energy that caterpillar has, and so it's doomed. It might linger for a week or more, but it's doomed.
Okay.
That's an example of a beneficial insect.
Yes, it is, absolutely. Okay, Dennis, we had a little conversation about chipmunks
Yeah.
a couple times ago, and we had a viewer who lives east of Mondamon, Iowa, send us some pictures, 3 chipmunks, and he says, if they aren't chipmunks, what are they? So this is not very far from Omaha, but it
Yeah.
is.
They are chipmunks, and chipmunks are a species of Iowa, believe it or not. And we do have chipmunks at Indian Cave State Park and along what we call the remnant of the eastern deciduous forest in Nebraska. But they're not prominent in the prairie. Chipmunks are a forested creature, but these are eastern chipmunks, and they're probably moving as the way we keep allowing forests because of fire suppression to be denser along the Missouri River. We're going to get more and more of these eastern creatures this way. And the same thing along the Platte River. Woodchucks originally were only in the very eastern part of Nebraska. Now they're as far as west as Kearney and North Platte. They're following the treed Platte River corridor as we suppress fire.
Okay, well, we used to feed them peanuts by hand in eastern Iowa.
Yeah.
Eastern Iowa. All right, here we have another tomato question, Kyle.
Okay.
This is one taken in Lincoln here, and they thought it was tomato spotted wilt virus, and I think you guys maybe had a different thought, but they want to know what they should do and can they eat them? What's the deal?
Yeah, well, first, I love those pictures. That is, to a pathologist, just beautiful. And that is tomato ring spot virus is kind of what it looks like. As you can see, we're not very good with our names. There are a bunch of ring spots on it. Tomato ring spot virus. As far as what to do, there's not a whole lot that you can do. As with a lot of our tomato viruses, these are vectored by thrips as well, so just any other insects. So any insect control in the garden would be beneficial, but you want to make sure that you're not harming any of our beneficial pollinators or anything like that. As far as eating that fruit, there shouldn't be any problem with eating it. As if you noticed on the one picture that had the fruit cut open, it was still kind of unripe in the middle there, and that's going to be your biggest problem with tomato ring spot virus, is that portions of that fruit just aren't going to become fully ripe, and as you're eating it, the texture and flavor will be slightly off, but all in all, still fine for your sandwiches.
So instead of fried green tomatoes, it's fried green and red.
Fried ring spot tomatoes, yes.
All right. Okay, this picture is also a tree picture for you, Jeff.
Okay.
This viewer has Turkish hazel, kind of an unusual tree.
Yeah.
15 years ago, did replant it to replace an ash. He said last year bottom leaves looked bad. He thought it was fire blight. This year, smaller leaves. Any ideas on this? Because I know we have Turkish filbert on campus.
Yeah. Well, there's a an eastern filbert disease. I'm trying to think what it is.
Oh boy, I know exactly
It's
what
like
you're
an
talking
eastern
about.
filbert blight, and it creates some cankers on the stem, some little black cankers. I didn't see that on the pictures there, and if you're not looking for it, I mean, when they were taking their pictures, so
Right.
I don't expect them necessarily to be looking for that. So that's highly susceptible. Turkish filbert's highly susceptible to it. It's an American disease, so the European imports are going to be more susceptible to it. I don't think it's that. After looking at that picture for a while, I think it could be a couple things. One may be upping your irrigation of the tree a bit, but because it's an overall decline, I'm kind of wondering if it's herbicide damage. And these trees may be fairly susceptible to root damage from Roundup and that sort of thing. And as a landscape manager, that's one of the things that sometimes we don't consider as how we're using our products or herbicides around woody plants and the damage it may cause, not immediately, but over a period of years. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards.
Especially since it's in turf.
Yeah, right.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Well, Terry has been doing a great job singling out some of our All-America selections in our Backyard Farmer Garden. This week, she's going to take you on a tour to see how amazing everything has come together this year. Let's take a few minutes to check out the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're going to do a little stroll around the garden. It's that time of year to start looking at what worked, what didn't work, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you're going to plan on doing for next year. As you can see, our garden looks fantastic. If you haven't visited yet, please come visit our garden. Our okra is looking really good. Our elephant ears are looking fantastic. Look at how big those ears are on those plants. Tomatoes are doing really good. We haven't seen a lot of blight on them yet, so we think we're doing pretty good in that. Our production bed, where we're getting all that fresh produce to be donated, is looking and working really well. Does look like we'll have to add a little bit more compost again this fall and turn that over to get that soil going like it is in the rest of the garden, but we already know that we'll have to do that maintenance. We're gonna keep taking notes, see what the little bugs liked, what the little critters didn't like, and work on next year for 2019. So if you haven't been in the Backyard Farmer Garden yet this year, please stop by and come check us out.
The videos we put together each week are really great at emphasizing specific plants. Occasionally, we like to look at the garden as a whole. It's a lot more interesting, however, if you come and see for yourself all the color in the produce. So set aside an hour, get ice cream first or last, come to Lincoln, see our Backyard Farmer Garden. We have a viewer who has a 17-year-old cottonless cottonwood with a crack oozing and a dead branch. Is that a goner?
Yes.
Okay. A Syracuse viewer wants to know the best time to transplant asparagus and rhubarb.
Well, asparagus you could do anytime once it's dormant, but spring would be the ideal time to do it, and as well with rhubarb. So both of those would be a spring transplant.
All right. Cucumbers are blooming beautifully, but no cucumbers are setting on. 2 viewers sent that.
Yeah, it could be the heat. Look at your moisture. I've mulched my cucumbers, and they are producing more than they ever have before. So I'm not having to irrigate them as much.
Okay.
So that seems to have helped mine.
All right. And from Johnson, Nebraska, tomatoes, the same thing. The blossoms are blooming and then they're drying up.
Yeah. I would think it would be the temperature, the pollinators, and some of that stuff going on. So again, kind of watch your moisture and be patient.
Okay. The non-productive vines on squash and zucchini, can they prune them back now without hurting the plant?
You know, if they're flowering, I would leave them on.
Okay.
So again, it's just kind of waiting this, you know, this time of year can be tough. And all of a sudden here in the middle of August, things will spin around for us and we'll start producing so much fruit. You know, then September comes and you're tired of it, so.
Okay. All right. Especially those zucchini that show
Yeah.
up in your car. Okay. Are you ready, Kyle?
I was born ready.
Oh, wow. Old dead fingers.
We'll see about that. So we have a viewer in Kearney that says peony leaves on one white flowering peony curl in the spring, and that's it. No spotting, no distortion. What is it?
Probably something further down below, some sort of root issue. I'd recommend just pruning that entire plant out.
Okay, several viewers say their peony leaves are covered with white stuff. What is it, and should they cut the foliage off?
It's probably powdery mildew. It's a little bit too damp in those areas. I would just leave it and enjoy the white powder.
We have a viewer in Pierce who has Honeycrisp apples that are covered with spots. What to do when?
Apple scab, nothing to do right now. You want to apply a fungicide right as the flowers are opening next spring.
All right. Do we recommend copper sulfate powder or Epsom salts for fungus in tomatoes?
Copper sulfate tends to work a little bit better than Epsom salts.
All right. Can early blight be prevented by spraying something on tomato plants before you see the blight appear?
Yes, it can. There are quite a few commercial fungicides that can be used, but if it's just your home garden, I wouldn't recommend spraying those. If it's a production thing, that's a little bit different, but I would wait and just kind of see if you're getting disease before you start applying a fungicide.
All right. Nice job. Okay, you ready, Dennis?
Yep. Always ready.
Okay, so the first question is it okay to knock squirrel nests out of the trees right now?
Yes, it is legal, and they'll probably rebuild now. So.
All right. Which animal is the worst animal for rabies? Which one is it?
Well, it's hard to say. Mainly, if you look at numbers, it's domesticated animals. Other than that, skunks are extremely high, and bats sometimes get high as well.
Okay, a Crofton viewer wants to know if smoke bombs work for moles.
Usually not.
Okay, what animal or bird makes perfectly round holes in dead limbs?
It's probably a sapsucker or a woodpecker.
Okay. Large turtles sunning themselves in irrigation lakes. Are those snappers or are they good guys?
Well, they're all good guys. So the answer is yes. It could be snappers, but snappers don't bask as much as large soft shells or large painted.
All right. Is natria harmful to wildlife?
Natria? I don't know what that is, so I'm going to say yes.
Oh, man.
No.
You could have
it
had
is not.
6.
It's actually, well, we'll talk about it after we give you your
Okay.
lightning round.
You
I
could
looked it
have
up.
had 6.
I had to get you once. All right.
Well, we'll see what
I answered it.
You did
we'll
wrong.
see what I'm in for, I guess.
All right, Jim, you ready?
Yeah.
We have several viewers who want to know what they can use on spider mites that are on butterfly bush and hydrangeas right now.
Cool evenings, probably try horticultural spray oil, insecticidal soap, Pyganic, which would be pyrethrins, and canola oil.
All right. A North Platte viewer wants to know whether Japanese beetles show a preference for light-colored flowers over red on their roses.
It seems to be so, white or yellow, and you'll see them on red as well.
Okay. We have an Omaha viewer who has mimosa webworm. Should she spray now, or is it way too late?
Yeah, second generation, you're not going to have any significant injury to the tree. Just let it go. Next year, it probably won't even be around.
All right. A pine is going to be removed for pine wilt. They want to know whether the stump should be painted with polyurethane to prevent it from happening next spring from the nematodes.
Oh, as a reservoir, I would just go ahead and take the whole stump out. I don't know why it's going to be left.
Okay. A Council Bluffs viewer has a striped worm on dill from an egg she said was identical to swallowtail, but she thinks a hornworm came out, yes?
A misplaced hornworm egg, I suppose that's a possibility. I can't think of one that would feed on dill per se. It's probably just incidental, in the wrong place, but maybe somewhere nearby it will have a host plant to feed on.
All right, excellent.
Oh, we're 5-5-5.
How about that?
High five.
Now you fight to the death. They're on air. Game of Thrones
Next question, please.
or Dead Man's Bones.
Yeah.
And on that note, let's do POW.
So you brought in some interesting things this week, didn't you?
I did from the Backyard Farmer.
From the Backyard Farmer Garden. So we'll start with the tall one here. And this is the China Purple Tube Clematis. And so with both of these, so we have this Duran's clematis here. These are both non-vining clematises, right? So they're both fairly tall. They can both get, 6 to 10 feet tall, something like that. So that makes them unusual from that standpoint. And also you can see how their flower differences are significantly different. So they, this is with a lot of clematis out there. We've had questions about that before about is this a clematis or not? They don't necessarily always resemble each other. So
Right.
so neither one probably likes being moved very well. They both flower from summer to early fall. And it looks like they both like full sun and probably will tolerate some shade.
The Duran, or the tall one, gets about 5 feet tall
Does
at
it?
the most.
Okay.
3, 4, 5, not
Okay.
10.
Okay.
Yep. And then the white one?
Then the white one is Oldham's Baby's Breath, so a Manchurian Baby's Breath. So it absorbs heavy metals when planted in potted soil, polluted soil. So this is something, like in Omaha when they were having the lead issue with soils, this would be something you might want to use in some of those things.
Well, and then it's an indicator too. So
Right.
It's like, holy cow, if the plant is absorbed it, you're in trouble.
Yeah, right. So again, full sun, well-drained soils. So 2 pretty cool plants, or 3 cool plants.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. All right. Picture questions next. So we're getting several questions like this of your question. These are on a Mexican love vine, which is an annual vine. Seem to have appeared overnight. What should he do to get rid of them? And what are they?
These are oleander aphids. Is that love vine also related to milkweed or dogbane?
It's a different one, but
Interesting.
yeah.
Because those are oleander aphids. They tend to come in midsummer and they just reproduce quite rapidly. So you can hit them if you have to dislodge them with a garden hose real strong. They usually won't climb back. Otherwise, an insecticidal soap will help to kill a lot of them too.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Jim. Okay, snakes for you, Dennis.
Good.
2 different sets. The first one is from Oxford, Nebraska. She
Okay.
thought they were garter snakes, but she says one was at least 4 feet long and very, very fast. And there are some babies, and she has an actual bucket full of snakes, and apparently they appear in her sprinkler pit every year. What are they?
They're all the same species. They're common garter snakes. Anything in Nebraska that has 3 stripes down the body, it doesn't matter what color. They can be blue, green, yellow, cream. If you have 3 stripes down the body, it's one of our 5 types of Thamnophis or garter snake family. And they're insect and worm feeders, so they're completely beneficial. Our tests show they're to carry no germs or viruses transmittable to mammals, and their teeth power is less than a 16th, so they're better to have than kids or dogs in the yard. I know my kids bit me all the time, so.
They do pee on you when you grab them. Of course, most people
These
don't grab
musks, they don't pee. The kids did, but not the kids. They have nitrogenous white pellets for their nitrogenous waste.
them. Nitrogenous, yeah. That's a fancy way of saying it's like.
And you have one more snake picture, which just came in, and this is Fairberry. She thought it was a black snake, but other than a big snake, now they're saying, is it a rat snake?
Well, they're 100% correct. It's a western black rat snake.
Okay, so both.
That's all. They got it all
That's
right.
the name of it. We got it right, you know? And they're only in counties pretty much that are close to the Missouri. So they're in counties that touch the Missouri until you get around. They come to Lancaster County and over to Jefferson. So they live in trees. They're only semi-arboreal snake. They eat baby birds and bird eggs in the spring, and they climb really well.
So they'll drop off on your head.
Yeah, but they're really, to me, everyone I've caught, they're very docile, so they just messes my hair up. I wish that would happen.
All right, thank you, Dennis. All right, Kyle, this is a Southwest Omaha viewer that has patterns in their rose bush, kind of a mosaic.
Okay.
And wrinkled leaves. What do we think this is?
Well, again, you know, we pathologists great at naming, probably a rose mosaic virus. You know, it does kind of look like we are seeing that mosaic kind of spread throughout the plant, which is very typical of a lot of our viruses. As far as this virus spreading, most likely we are doing most of the spreading with it just by pruning and moving around the bed. Anything that we touch can then transmit that virus. So if you are going to do some pruning, make sure that you're sanitizing your clippers. Dip them in about a 10% bleach solution for a couple of minutes, or there are some commercial products as well, such as Green Shield, that work. As far as that rose, you know, if you enjoy the mosaic, you can leave it there, but chances are you'll want to remove it to prevent that virus from spreading to the other bushes.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Jeff, this is a simple, what is this plant? We usually get this one once a year.
Right.
What is this? She does know it's a biennial.
Okay, it's Scarlet Gilla or Gilia, and I think it also goes by Standing Cypress is another name for it. So, so it's Ipomopsis rubra. So
And
it's,
nice.
yeah, it is. It's a cool plant. So I think it's more common to the south, so Oklahoma, Texas, that sort of thing, where you'll see it a little bit more often. But I guess with climate change, I guess it seems like every year now we have this question. Someone
Right.
calls it in.
And our beloved Gladys grew this in her garden all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is. It's a cool plant.
Cool. All right, thanks. You know, many times a wounded tree will take care of itself. Sometimes that problem runs way deeper than the cut, and then you'll have to deal with a canker. Here's Kyle to tell us more.
Earlier this year, you guys may remember seeing Lauren talk about cankers on some of the trees in his backyard and how he controlled them by pruning at ground level. Well, there are a few other things that we can do with cankers as well. And so one of the things about cankers is first you want to be able to identify them. And a canker is just a localized area of dead wood that will have, sometimes it may be a sunken appearance, or it'll be a little bit darker than the rest of the wood around it. As you can see on this tree next to me, we do have a few different cankers here. One of the things that we can surely see is this kind of black, this black effuse that is streaming out. And that is a sure sign of a canker. Here we also have a couple more cankers that are down below. Most likely these were caused by some sort of wound. And so we can have cankers that are caused by some pathogens, whether they are bacterial or fungal pathogens. But we can also have cankers that are caused by abiotic factors, so some of those non-living things, such as temperature fluctuations, the extreme heating and cooling that we experienced earlier this season may have resulted in some bark splitting. That can turn into a canker. Or lawnmower blight. If you're mowing too close to the base of your tree, you wound it. Now that wound that's an entry point for any bacteria or fungi to enter into it. And so one of the things to remember about cankers is their size really does matter. And so if you have a canker on a branch, typically you can just prune that branch off. You want to make sure that you're pruning enough of that branch away, though, that you're completely removing all of the dead tissue and all of the diseased tissue. Since a lot of those cankers do have either fungi or bacteria inside of them, if we don't prune far enough back, so about 3 to 5 inches down past where that canker is, then we might not get it all, and infection can occur next season again. And so when you are doing some of that pruning, you want to make sure that it's going to be dry when you're pruning. Pruning in wet weather is a great way to spread any sort of bacterial or fungal disease. And if it's going to be dry for a couple of days after you prune, well, now that wood is going to have a chance to seal itself off and infection is much less likely. Now, if we're dealing with the cankers down on the main trunk, those can be a little bit more concerning. You can do what Lauren did and prune at ground level, or hopefully the tree will survive it. And so one of the rules that we kind of look at whenever we are looking at a canker on the main trunk is how much of the trunk is encompassed by that canker. If we're seeing less than a third of the trunk is surrounded by that canker, well, there's a good chance that tree will wall itself off and will survive just fine. Once we start getting to cankers that encompass more than 1/3 to 1/2 of that trunk, need to start thinking about removal of that tree. There's a good chance that that wood rot will move further in. Structurally, that lessen the structural integrity of that tree, and it could become an issue. And just to recap, now is a great time to be scouting your trees, looking for some of these cankers. Try to catch them when they are smaller. That way we can do some of that pruning early on, or take care of any other remedies that may be necessary.
Inspecting those trees on a regular basis does help you know if you've got a problem. Remember to have a little bit of patience to see if that tree recovers or if you really do need to prune something out. And we did have a lot of questions about cankers this year, especially in evergreens. So that's kind of unfortunate. All right, so Jim, you have what is this?
A couple quick picks.
Well, kind of quick picks. The first is, found this little guy in the grass in the garden. She thought it was a jewel caterpillar. Chrysalis, what is that?
It's possibly an American lady. Actually, I believe it feeds on the violets, but that's the pupil, the chrysalis, you might say. They all have distinctive ones. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure.
But it's really pretty.
It is pretty.
Okay, and then we have a couple others that are this guy, burrowed by the potatoes. What is it?
Yes,
Good
a
or
northern
bad?
mole cricket is really bizarre. It can actually fly, believe it or not, with those short wings. But they're strongly attracted to lights at night, and so we often will find them in driveways and sidewalks in the morning, that kind of thing. But it burrows in turf grasses, meadows, pasture areas, usually near creeks, and it feeds on roots of plants and whatever else it may find, to feed on, whether it's a living insect or an earthworm or whatever, but mainly kind of an omnivorous just like crickets are, sort of omnivorous.
Right, so not her potatoes, probably.
It could be actually attracted to those potatoes,
What's
but
those
it
mashed
won't take
potatoes?
much, right? It'll just only take a few bites.
It's share.
Okay, Dennis, this is a viewer who found this done to his honey locust in the backyard. There's some spots higher. None of the other trees seem to be affected, not as big of spots. What did this, and what can he do about it?
It's a tree squirrel, a fox squirrel. Capturing the culprit is the best way. They probably after moisture or some micronutrients. You can try a repellent, a commercial repellent, or mixing vegetable oil with cayenne pepper, very thick mixture, and painting it on the tree. But if you don't paint it where it's going to chew next, it's not going to work. So capturing that culprit in a live trap.
And honey locusts seem to be a favorite.
Yeah, elms and honey locusts, they get more starch on them, I think, and so they go.
And then you'll get a canker formation.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, thank you very much. So, Kyle, this is a Lebanon, Kansas viewer.
Ooh.
Yeah, two 3-year-old cherry trees produced fruit, but all of a sudden one of them is turning yellowish with brown spots, which show up pretty well in this picture. She does say that they're mulched lightly. She hasn't really done a lot of watering because they've had very timely rains.
Okay.
Doesn't know. What is this, do we think?
Well, that kind of looks like cherry leaf spot caused by, it's a fungal pathogen, Bloomerliella. It's a tough one, a tongue teaser. But that's kind of my guess for what's going on there. But also, as I was looking at that first picture, it did seem like one branch in particular was a little bit more yellow than the rest of the tree. And so I'd kind of follow that yellow branch back and see if you're not dealing with some sort of localized lesion on the branch. That's also known as a canker. And then you may want to actually prune that branch off if you do see some sort of damage there.
All right, thank you, Kyle. All right, Jeff, this is also a pruning question, kind of a little different one. Has a bare root tree, actually two pretty obvious branches on this one at about 24-inch height. She wants to know whether she should prune one of those off, when, how much, what should she do with this pretty nice looking little red oak?
Yeah, I would say because the leaves are such a nice size, that tells me that the tree is healthy. And I see it's still in a pot. So I guess a couple thoughts. One is if you intend to keep the plant, and I think you should at this stage, I think it's fine. And I know her concern was, with these two, do I have, some issue here as far as keeping it. But I would want to go ahead and get that planted so that way that plant can establish a good root system through the winter and through the rest of this fall. And then if you want to prune one, I'd wait till spring. Again, like I was suggesting earlier in the show, before bud break, take that one that's off to the left-hand side there. You may have to continue to stake it or do something to help train that trunk there, but I think you'll be fine.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we have a couple of announcements tonight of fun things going on in the gardening world, beginning with Haskell Ag Lab Open House Monday, it's actually Tuesday, August 14th, 8:30 to 3:30, and we, Backyard Farmer, will be there from 1:30 to 2:30 live, and that's in Concord, open to the public, so that is a really fun thing to do. Our second one is Grow a Row, the produce donations, Tuesdays 5 to 7 p.m., always during our Backyard Farmer Garden, in the Backyard Farmer Garden on East Campus, and we're getting a lot of good donations to that. All right, so we have just some questions.
Okay.
Jim, this is a viewer who overwinters coleus indoors. Mealybugs are a little tricky. He puts them outside, and the mealybugs apparently are exploding and moving to all sorts of other plants. Anything he can do to control them before he brings plants back into the house?
That's going to be a little bit tough. And if you have heavily infested stems or portions of the plant, you can definitely prune those out, and that will greatly help to cut the numbers down. Mealybugs are difficult to control because of that fuzzy, exudate that's kind of cottony perhaps, or it might be waxy. And so it's hard to get any insecticide to them. If it's strictly a vegetative plants without flowering, you could use something systemic, which probably acetamiprid is one of those systemic insecticides that is very gentle on bees or whatever. But if it's just strictly foliage, I don't see why you couldn't use a systemic to help to control those.
All right, thanks so much. Dennis, we have a viewer in Trainer, Iowa. She has bats living behind the shutters of her house. How does she get rid of them?
Well, if she needs to get rid of them, if there's a reason, because usually behind the shutters of a house they're not really causing anything but eating insects, you could wait till they leave, and they'll probably leave almost every night, and then take the shutters down and put like a thin black mesh behind there so they can't go in the shutters or behind it. And it's mainly exclusion. They can't chew through anything, so you can exclude about anything. There's no repellents, so you're going to have to physically exclude them from going behind there. But this time of year, most of them should be out flying around all night long, getting food and mosquitoes and other moths. And so just take them down, leave them down for a couple of days, and then, put some screen behind them and put them back up.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Kyle, we have a viewer who wants to know whether lettuce grown in home gardens is safe. She's read something about Psychospora. Are lettuces safe in home gardens?
Generally, yes, they will be. Big thing's going to depend on what you've applied to those to your garden. And so if you are adding some compost, make sure that you don't have any biological or no meat products, anything like that in the compost. Any animal fats that can breed a lot of these bacteria that end up being fairly pathogenic to humans. And so if you grew it in your backyard and you did not put anything questionable on it, I think it'd be perfectly fine to eat.
Excellent. All right, thanks, Kyle. Jeff, you're out of luck because we are out of time.